Now we will begin the forum on the Ecological Integrated Dialogue ESG, and we will have this last day forum and session. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm the Secretary General Jaemin from the Energy Transition Forum. So this is the last day, and on day one, we talked about the corporate responsibility and what they need to do to change and what values they need to carry to drive the changes. And on day two, it was not just about the companies and businesses. We talked about these political, ecological perspectives and the paths we need to take in the future. And today is the last day of the forum, and the first session is more about young generation, and we have like PhD candidates and the doctor candidates will be here to talk about the values that we need to change and what solidarity that we need to achieve or form as the generation. Climate crisis is or forcing us to redesign the way we work and the way we operate as a society. Without the changes, we may not be able to change, and we have to think about how we can make this whole planet livable. And with the current and the conventional approaches, we may not have to find the answer, so we need to have more in-depth discussion. So at this climate change colloquium, we want to have more in-depth discussion on that. So today, about the responses to the climate crisis, we have a lot of conversations. But if you only focus on the climate crisis and what we have to do, sometimes we lose the sight of why we have to make these changes and where this whole crisis were originated and what values and what thoughts we have to have in approaching this whole issue. We should not lose sight of that. So today we will talk about the things that are forgotten or things that are missing. This whole the beings and the nature and the whole things. The first presentation will be about the rural areas, and because these are the most vulnerable group and they are facing the greatest challenges. So that's why we have to make the quick or fast-paced responses. But in the rural areas, along the way, they suffer the destruction and they also face a lot of challenges. So it doesn't mean that the rural areas are not just the source of the food or the agriculture produces. That's the wrong philosophy. The first presenter has been there, and he had an interview with the farmers and the rural village people in finding the answers to climate crisis. And he had this in-depth interview with the people, and we invited a researcher who actually did the interview. So the first presenter.
The first topic is climate and energy justice, and what is the remaining task? Mr. Ko Inhwan, who is the PhD candidate from the University of Washington, will make a presentation. His presentation will be about 15 minutes. After listening to two presentations, we're going to invite Miyoung from GRI so that we can have around 30 minutes of discussion together. Without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, Mr. Ko Inhwan, 15 minutes. I'm Ko Inhwan, who is the PhD candidate of the Political Science, University of Washington. And I am a scholar who is studying the climate justice. The climate justice can be defined in two ways. First, historically, there should not be anyone who are lagging behind and historically marginalized group. They are marginalized, and because of the climate change, they should not be marginalized anymore, and we should prevent them getting more damage or getting more losses. And we should help them so that they can have the minimum damage. That is the typical definition of climate justice. That is the first goal that I have. Second one is not just about the damage itself. In the process of responding to climate change, like energy efficiency and renewable energy and CCUS, when we are doing that, to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, the cost for the process should be minimized, especially for the marginalized people. They should not bear the cost more compared to other non-marginalized groups. That's something that we should do and that we should be working on. Today, I'm going to tell you about the second definition about climate justice in the context of Korea, especially the marginalized group within the Korean context. They have been economically marginalized, and later they can be a little bit more discriminated, those who are living in the rural area of South Korea. I'm, tell- I'm telling you the conclusion first, and let me recap the conclusion. The renewable facility requires a lot of technique and economic cost. And that's because of that, usually it is located in the area where the population density is not that high. Usually when the population density is low, usually they are rural areas rather than the urban town. So for deciding and the location of renewable energy sources, it can cause some conflicts. And when there are conflicts, and those conflicts will reflect the features and the characteristics of the rural town. And those conflicts and the confrontation can be hindrance to 2050 net zero. So to make a transition to 2050 net zero, we should understand economic, social, cultural aspect of the rural towns. I'm going to take you to a small town in Korea, Yaksamyeon, and it is around 300 or the 400 kilometers away from Seoul. And you can see the Yaksamyeon. This is a small town. And this is Gwansanli, where I'm studying, and they have a huge solar farm. And because of the siting of the solar farm, there has been lots of contention. And actually, the citizens are emotionally charged, and they are getting damaged emotionally and also financially. This is the video clip I took. I went there and I was driving to capture the scene. This is the candidate for the site. And there is a reclaimed land. And there is a big farm. And they are harvesting rice there. And they are now doing a lot of agriculture as a means of their survival. And there are lots of farming still going on, but much of them has been acquired by the developers. Just about 40 years ago, they have the farms, but they want to grow the rice. So they created this kind of a paddy. And the land was reclaimed, and they have the paddy land like this. In the past, it was an island. In the 1990s, it was connected to other islands. They have the bridge, and actually before the 1999, it was a sole alone island. So the Gwansanpo is not just the source of the income. It is a symbolic meaning because they can now grow the rice. So this is like a moment, the place for their past memory. So in the TV show, you can see this kind of the typical scenery in the farm town. The reason I'm showing you this is because of this. In the Gwansanpo, there is a small village, and there are around 100 elderly citizens living there, and they have two buildings just like this. And after doing some agricultural activities, they come back to this building and they share their lunch. Yes, it was delicious. I shared the lunch with them. I'm telling you about these two buildings. Those two buildings are now split. What I mean is one building is pro and the other building was con. So one building was supporting the solar panel, and the other building was not supporting the solar panel. So there was a division among the people. So there is a division about the opinion of the very small community. And because of that, they are totally separated over the renewable energy sources, especially placing the solar panel. The two buildings are now emotionally separated. And I took the photo, and this is the place which will be covered with the solar panel in the future. So in front of the city hall, community city hall, they are protesting like this. And why the people are divided into two groups? And that's something that I should study, and I feel so sorry about that kind of emotional division between the community members. And I cannot give you a single explanation why they were emotionally divided. But rather than that, what I want to emphasize is the renewable energy facilities, and it will be usually located in the rural towns across any country in the world. So this is a landmark study. Renewable facilities are located in the rural town. That has become the common sense because they have open space, they have land to be developed. And also, the cost of the land is relatively low. So, as a developer, this can be the optimal target. However, this simple fact can cause significant issues, and that has been proven empirically in last July in the US. Let me show you a statistical example. You can see these numbers. The index for the development across the US, the land with 25% development, the land with 75% development. When you take a look at the orange is a solar, the blue is a wind. You can clearly see which area is the key target site. If the development level is below the 25%, if the development level is low, as you can see, they are the usual target. And wind is usually located in the relatively low developed areas. And another factor is population density. When the population density is very low, as you can see, usually solar and wind facilities are located. The black one is a coal power plant. Those power plants or the power generation facilities are located in these kind of areas. Let me show you this. This is the map I drew with myself. And I'm going to give you a link, and you can click on this map. And this is the megawatt in Gangnam, Seoul. This is from Daedok. And Daedok has the highest capacity. And in Haenam, you can see the capacity is 602. Compared to Wando, it is 400 times difference. Compared to Seoul, in Wando, which is far away from Seoul, the solar panel capacity is totally different. So if we are considering the size of the city, the Seoul's solar panel should be 400 times larger. Actually, it should have been. Anyway, this is the location of the solar panel. And what matters is the interval or the distance among the solar panel facilities. Usually, many countries and many communities come up with their development plan. They have their ordinance. For example, the solar panel should be 100 meters away from the road, like 200 meters away from the house. This is the ordinance that they have. For example, in the case of the Wando that I'm talking about, they have the specific clause. The facility should be 1 kilometer away from the road, which means we have limited sources to place the solar panel. And this is the usual location of the solar panel siting, and you can see the geographic expansion as time goes by. My first paper was the distance among the facilities and why there is a spread like this. My argument was because there was some resistance among the rural town, and that is why there has been spread of the solar panels, as you can see. In Korea, this kind of distancing or the distancing interval can have a negative impact for the proliferation of the solar panels. So in Korea, we are going to have a streamlined regulation on the distancing among the solar panels. There are some policy actions, and they are referring to other countries' policy, and according to other countries, the interval or the distance regulation is pretty much minimal. This is another map that I drew. When you click on this button, you can see not only the solar panel distance, sometimes there are counters that come with a regulation. You cannot build any more solar panel within the next 2 years, including the solar panels. And many of the counties come up with a ban on the new facilities, and they are having strong regulation about the distancing among the facilities. This is the statistics that I have. This is just for your reference. And if you are asking me in person, I'm going to tell you how the detailed interpretation was made based on this statistics. What I am arguing is pretty much simple. You can see two photos. You may think, oh, was it a solar panel? Yes, they are. And you can see the solar panel on the highway and over the highway. On the rural scenery, you can see how solar panels are placed. What I'm arguing is this. The first big difference is this one. Between the city and rural areas, scenery is the first difference. The green land is the major scenery in rural areas, and we put artificial components, solar panel. Visually, it can be distracting. Visually, it can be a little bit cumbersome. Sometimes it can break the symbol of the town, culture of the town, and their memory about the town. And probably the rural people have a higher resistance against this kind of scenery deterioration. Rural towns have economically and socially different from the cities. The city energy demand and CO2 emission are also different from that of the rural town. Actually, to cut down the CO2 within the city, we are placing the solar panel in rural towns, out of the cities. So again, what I am suggesting is this. We were cooperating with a rural town, and we made only some efforts to collaborate with them. We should go, and we should live, and we should work with them. There are many solar panels in the rural towns. We should go to lower population density area and listen to their voices. For example, ethnography studies should be done to take the detailed opinions of the local people. Last but not least, what I'm underlining is when you go to the rural town, there are government officers and developers, and there are many people. However, the citizens in the local town are concerned, and actually they do not trust the government officers and policymakers. The same goes to the US because it is a matter of life and death for them. To relieve that kind of a concern is the key for the youth activities. Next, we should make the local people's voice heard, and we should deliver their voice to the developers and to the government. That is the most critical factor in the collaboration with the rural town. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
네, 시간을 잘 지켜주셔서
Thank you very much for being on time.
저희가 오늘 토론을 준비하는 그 가장 중요한 부분들은 그래서
One of the reasons that we need to have discussion is what we should do when we are collaborating with the rural town. And he has brought a really important topic to us.
So the second presenter is, well, as we talked about the rural areas, it's not just the source of the agricultural produce or the source of the renewable energy, and that's too much focused on or like driven by the human beings or the urban people. On the other hand, when we think about this whole climate changes and the green transition, we do a lot of things for like responding to this climate change. Crisis, but we have to think about whether it's really ecological or is it really only for the needs of human beings. And we talked about this whole green thing, and we need to take stock of what we have done so far in the name of green, and that will be the second presentation. So the second presenter is will talk about the color of the cities, and he will talk about how green are we and our green spaces. And this Mingyu from Biodiversity Foundation will make a presentation. Although I mentioned it previously before, it would be great if you can be here and stand still, because if you move around, it will be hard for the audience to focus. Let me start my presentation. Hello, my name is Mingyu from the Biodiversity Foundation. Great to see you. So today I will talk about the color of the green spaces. What is the color of our green cities? When you think about this whole green color of cities, it means the green space. But is it really green? Is it truly green? That was the question I started to ask. Well, when we have this green space, I mean, it would be too abstract question when we ask this question whether it's truly green, but I will give you some examples. As was presented by the first presenter, there were like solar panels, and they are destroying the whole rural areas and marginalizing the vulnerable people in the rural areas. And there was some conflict and resistance. Well, these are the people who are weak and they don't have any channel to make their voices heard. And about in the process of this whole energy transition, sometimes they are sacrificed. So that is why, as we responding to the climate crisis, we have to make it just and equitable. And in doing this, there are so many people who need to be protected. There are like the non-human beings who are living in the wild. Well, the rural areas and the vulnerable people in our society, they might be marginalized in the energy transition, and worse yet, these whole non-human beings in the wild are even more marginalized. And the picture that you see is the mountain where a lot of the solar panels are built. And at a glance, you can see that, as was talked about, this like the whole distancing, and it should be far apart from the houses. So they just build the solar panels in the middle of the mountain. And my question to you is, I mean, the solar and the wind are like the green energy. That's why we are building the solar panels. But is it really green if we are doing this whole destruction on the mountain? And the second thing is about the solar farm. Well, for the location, you have to have the right path for the wind, where you can have the strong wind. But in the winter, it's the path where the migratory birds are moving around, and that's the main passage for them. So there are like a blades along the passage of the migratory birds, and if that's the case in the West Sea, we have a lot of fog in Korea, and when there's a fog, the birds may not see the whole blades, and they will like mixing these whole birds, and they might be killed by these whole blades. So is it really green? But what I'm trying to tell you today, in having this renewable energy and having green transition, I will not focus on the non-human beings, but I want to scale it down to the urban green space, whether they are really green and whether we are not really using it in the right terms. So, for example, this is one such case. This is the ecological park in the Pungam Lake, our water reservoir. You can see that there's a huge forest and the lake and the passage or trail walk. So it's like the best, or it looks like the best description of this whole green area. However, when you look at the details, they cut down the whole natural forest and the greeneries. So it's not really the green thing. Near the water reservoir, there were like abandoned rice paddies, and they were like a natural environment, but they destroyed the whole thing, and they built this ecological park, and they built these stone walls so that the water will not get into this land. So it's a very clean, and however, they destroyed to build this ecological park. So is the ecological park really green? Can we really say that? And moving on to the next example. So this is in Seoul, in the western part of Seoul. It's like Anyangcheon, a river. And the water comes from Gyeonggi province, Anyang and Uiwang, and it's like a stream, a part of the Han River. And in the wintertime, we have a lot of migratory birds, and we have a great and growing biodiversity. In 2007, they designated as a sanctuary for the migratory birds. So as you can see here, there are many great birds, and the very rare wintertime birds are living here in this Anyang River. So like northern Pinpo, Eurasian region, and they designated this as a sanctuary. And it's between the two bridges from Omok Bridge and Mokdong Bridge. So this small area was designated as sanctuary. But when you hear the word of the sanctuary, we may feel relaxed and feel better because, okay, this is protected by the government. The local government is now protecting by designating it as sanctuary. However, when you look at this whole picture, you may be disappointed because this is where the migratory birds, and they come to like October, and that was when they started to build this whole construction. It is because, as you can see, these, you can see here the water basin, and that's why they started to have the construction. It's this, about like 320,000 tons of water can be reserved here, and they have this rainwater pumping station, and that is the passage of this whole water outlet. And when you have like a heavy rain, then this water tunnel, according to a government official, when they have like an unprecedented, like a heavy rain, something that we'll never experience in our life, that's why they have this whole concrete tunnel for such a rare event. We had a huge flooding in Seoul, and Mokdong didn't have such a flooding. And they are saying that this whole tunnel helped them not to experience such damage. But anyway, I mean, responding to climate change or adapting to the climate change is important. But along the way, we had this whole construction of the tunnel, and that, as I showed you, is now destroying this whole habitat for the migratory birds. And when you look at the statistics here, from 2019 to 2020, according to the survey of Seoul City, for this construction area, the sanctuary for the migratory birds, the birds, about 69% of the birds were here, and the 77% of the water birds gathered here. But from 2020 to 2021, when they started to have this construction, within this sanctuary, they only have like a 29% of the migratory birds and also the 23% of the water birds. And the other notable thing here is that these like dogs and what we are really familiar with, their percentage went up. However, these other birds, the rare birds that we see here, the number of the dogs went down. What does that mean? Because these sensitive species abandoned this place as their habitat, and that is now being replaced by the dogs or the species that are familiar to us and which are familiar to living near to human beings. So my point is this adaptation to the climate crisis is now destroying the habitat, and we are not taking care of these whole species which are calling this place as their home. So that's the mistake that we are making. This is also near or right next to the sanctuary, and this is the carbon neutral forest or the walkway. And they have the Spanish oak here, and they have this whole Spanish oak trees lined up here. And as you can see from the name, it's exotic species. Well, I'm not saying that the exotic species is good or bad, but my point here is that as they plant the trees, they cut down the original trees and indigenous trees, and they replaced this forest with the whole exotic trees. And for like ecological park, I mean, for like a carbon neutrality, they are now like accounting this whole carbon credits or the outcomes. And the one thing I would like to share here with you, here there was a lot of destruction to build a forest, and this is where we had the highest density of the migratory birds in the sanctuary, because there is a river island at the mouth of this whole river, and there's a small island, and the birds were mostly observed or detected on the island because it was protected. But as we built this whole carbon forest, and it really blocked this sanctuary or the whole river passage, and the birds could not get in there. And this is another sanctuary for the migratory birds in the Chunglang River, and to have this project, I mean, the name of the project is quite ridiculous. It's the ecological restoration and the restoration of the nature. And under the name of this restoration, they built this whole stone stairs. And as I mentioned before, the birds need the protected area, which are protected from people and a lot of bushes and the trees. But they built the stone stairs here. So people come in there and they have the picnic. So it's really best place for people to have a picnic. So when there are lots of people, and these whole birds will be exposed to people rather than being a sanctuary. So this was the picture taken in 2005, and we had this avian influenza at this place. And the migratory birds had, I mean, even better access from the people with this whole stone stairs. And from the pandemic COVID-19, we learned that we are destroying this habitat for the plants and the animals, and then we can also get caught with this whole influenza or this virus, and that's the lesson we learned. And this could be another such case. And this is the Cheonggyecheon River. We have also, there are three sanctuaries, Anyangcheon, Cheonggyecheon, and Junglangcheon, three sanctuaries in Seoul. And in all of these sanctuaries, the migratory birds are not being protected. And as you can see here, people can walk along the sanctuary and this river. The sanctuary are very close to this walk path. And other than the sanctuaries, the parks, let me walk you through how these parks are protected. One thing that caught my eye in the park is that these whole green areas, the land cannot breathe. It's really covered with this whole concrete and asphalt and this whole land and soil cannot breathe because it's all covered with the asphalt and no water can get into the land or the soil. So it means that the water will flow over the land and soil and it will get together at some point and it will make this whole place vulnerable to flooding. We talk about this whole adaptation and response to climate changes and we need more green space, but if you have this kind of the concrete all the way, then you may not be able to help the nature to restore itself. And that's not all. And from the greenery, I mean, if they try to get closer to us, I mean, if they grow and flourish, then we don't want to see them because it's too much. And we try to clean them and cut them. That's what we do every spring and autumn to cut down these whole bushes and the grasses. And like twice every year, we cut down these whole trees. Have you ever walked on along this whole pathways? Because you can see a lot of insects and the animals are killed. I mean, the frogs and these whole hedgehogs and the small like insects and the birds, they are killed by these like lawnmowers. So my point here is that they are killed by these lawnmowers, but also their habitat is now being destroyed. These small insects could live here in this microhabitat, and these dead trees are really good habitat for them, but they are caught by human beings because they call it like the trees that needs to be protected. So these whole trees and little bushes are cut by the lawnmowers, and these whole fallen leaves are sent to somewhere that I don't know. And also they destruct this whole habitat for these whole biodiversity, and they also spray all these chemicals and these whole pesticides are abused. And also the environmental organization also looked into the consumption of these whole chemicals for the pesticides, and they are very toxic. And the insects and the bees, the honeybees, I mean, they are killed by these whole pesticides. And this is the picture I took in my neighborhood. And for the grasses, they are leaving these whole insects, and the little school students put these little paintings to show that people should not smoke here because there are living insects, but still they are now spraying these whole pesticides over the grasses, although they want to show that these whole little insects are living here. And also, these whole sticky killers for like insects are also a problem because they kill all the insects, whether they are good or bad, or big or small. And when you go to the park, there are these kind of like killers. And I live near the Ansan Mountain, and all these whole trees are like covered to kill these whole insects or the as a pesticide. And it's not just for these trees, and they kill a lot of good insects like the spiders and other insects. Well, but they really grow and fast and they adapt to fast. But what really kills them is like the predators that kill these bad insects. And also, what's really ironic or ridiculous is that in the ecological park, you can see these electric killers for like mosquitoes or these insects. And we go out there in the wild to enjoy the nature and to enjoy the greeneries. But we have this kind of electric like killers for the insects, and we can hear the noise that the insects are killed by these whole electric killers. That's so ridiculous. So I shared some examples, and with that, I wanted to tell you this. This whole green space is not the air purifier for us. The green space in the cities are very important in responding to or adapting to the climate changes. They help us to reduce the heat and reduce this damage from the flooding. It's really important. But the way we deal with the green space is not right because we are not treating it as some facility or some machine. So we kind of objectify and we think they are like a cleaners and we try to use them for our own benefits. And that's wrong. We say that we need to have more green space, but we are instead of protecting them, we are destroying this whole green space. So we say we have to go for like a greenery, and we go for renewables and more green space, but there are like the non-human beings that were marginalized, and that should be the focus of our discussion. So green space is not just a means, they can be also a purpose to be protected, and they are not something that we can use, and then we can destroy the habitats of the plants and the animals, and we need to have the changes in our mindset. We think this whole urban green space is just for human beings, but that's also for the whole biodiversity and the non-human beings, and for the habitat of the all the other living creatures. And number 4, this whole habitat for these living creatures, to make it or protected and preserved, we should abandon this like a human beings oriented approach, and we should leave it as it is. And let's look at the words, the nature. In Korean or in Chinese characters, it means that they leave it as it is. So they don't need any cutting or any trimming by human beings. And we have to let them grow as they are, and we have to let them who they are, and then only then they can become true green and true greenery ecosystem. That's when we can call them truly green space. That's it for my presentation. Thank you so much.
송민규 연구원님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sung, for the presentation. Now it's time for the panel discussion. We're going to invite the speakers and panelists to the front line of the stage. We're going to organize the seating, and then we can start our discussion.
네, 지금부터 토론을
Right,
시작하도록
it's time for a discussion.
이 프로그램을 기획하면서 그리고
While we are planning for this program, and while I was talking to these two presenters,
답답하기도 하고
and I feel a bit disturbing, and I was wondering whether we can really do it in our practices. And maybe we are only delaying the timeline. Maybe we are causing more troubles.
아마 조금 이따 토론에서 나누겠지만
So in our discussion, we can talk about this more and more in the GRI, Gyeonggi Research Institute. GRI is coming up with the carbon neutrality policy and some of the practices. And regarding the GRI's practices,
연구자 입장에서는 또 더 많은
and GRI will share their action items and what they are actually doing.
도 하고 새로 나아가야 될
So we can check out what we have been doing, and we can discover the future way forward.
첫 번째 토론자로 모신 저희 송미영
So we have invited Vice President Song Miyoung from Gyeonggi Research Institute. Let's listen to her, then we can have some more discussion.
네, 안녕하세요. 잘 들리시나요? 두 분의 발제 너무 잘 들었고요. 사실 이런 문제들이 예전부터 굉장히 심화되고 있는 중이고, 신재생 에너지를 저희가 도입을 하고, 기후 위기나 뭐 탄소 중립이니 뭐 여러 가지 국가적인 정책을 수립하고 난 후에는 더 이런 문제들이 심화되는 중입니다. 근데 그런 것들이 신재생 에너지나 기후위기 대응에서만 나타나는 게 아니고, 원래 제가 생각할 때는 발전시설이 가지고 있는 이해관계가 그대로 투영되는 거라고 생각합니다. 이때까지 석탄이나 원전, 어떤 에너지 발전시설에서도 같은 문제가 있어 왔어요. 그리고 언제든지 그 입지 문제가 굉장한 갈등의 요소였고, 그 입지가 어쨌든 그 지가, 토지의 이용 측면에서 이 소외된 지역에서 일어나는 것이 당연하다고 생각하는 도시의 그 사람들하고 정책 결정자들이 그런 결정을 하는 거죠. 그래서 아까 첫 번째 발제자분들이 보여주신 것처럼 제도가 가진 모순, 아니면 제도가 고쳐야 할 부분, 아니면 제도가 지향해야 될 부분에 대해서 저희 연구원
make that
같은
kind
것도
of
항상
decision.
고민을 하고
That is
있고
why my research
그런
institute
측면에서
is thinking about this over
재생에너지도
and over,
크게 봐서는
what we should
에너지
do and
발전
what
시설의
we should not
틀을
do.
벗어나지
Renewable
못하는구나
energy
이런
facilities
생각을
are
하고
just
있고
like other
그런
power
제도적인
generation
변화에 대해서 논의를
facilities.
많이
So
진행하고 있습니다.
regarding that, we
근데 이제
are
이
thinking about
문제는
the policy
어찌 보면
modifications,
태양광이든 풍력이든
be it solar panel or
실질적으로는 그게
wind.
돈의 문제라는 걸 우리가
It is
이해하는 게
a
더 중요할
matter
것
of
같아요.
cost anyway.
우선
That can be the starting point.
지금 같은 에너지가 필요하고 에너지
We
위기
need
시대에
energy right
진짜
now. We are living
국가적으로나
in the
아니면
era of
어떤
energy
지역적으로
crisis.
에너지를 어떻게 공급하고
Many countries,
그거를
many
관리하는
regions are
것인데
worried about
우리
energy supply and
여전히
demand.
공급 중심의
In
사회예요.
Korea,
그래서
we are still
수요를
the
좀
supply
서로 좀
driven society.
조금씩 아껴간다든가
So
이런
we
수요
should think
관리
more
계획을
about demand
되는데 이
management, but we
부분은
do not have a
문제고
clear demand
근데
management in
공급을 하다
Korea,
보면
which
이런
means
문제는 할 수가
somebody should
없어요.
supply energy
그다음에
at
이제
any
아까
cost.
제가 말한
And with
비odiversity
that approach,
문제,
we are going to
육지의
face
문제
this
자체가
kind of
그런
issues
문제고
continuously.
공급 개발
I told you
방안을
it's a matter
그
of the
이익들을
cost. The
봐야지만
location
때문에
and siting is a matter
사실은
of the
문제
cost.
삼고
The
딱 이제
developers want to
입지시키려고
find
하는
out
거고
some more
대신에
lucrative
이제
and some more
주민들의
profitable
생각에
land. That's
지점은
why they go to the rural
주민들도 이런
areas.
문제를
However,
돈의
we
문제로
should
이해를
convince
충분히
the
해야
citizens. The
본인들이
citizens
제도할 수
should be
있고
able to
뭔가
understand that
필요한
this
부분이
is a
있어요. 그래서
financial
제도를 요구할 수 있는
issue, and only then
그래서
they
그런
can ask
점들을
for some modification of the
활동가들이나
policy
전문가들도
and the
잘 좀
right
이해를 하셨으면
compensation.
좋겠다는
So
그런
this is
입장을
something
가지고
that we should have
그리고
some
또
discussion
하나는
together.
이 돈의 문제를 잘 생각해 보면
Once
전력을 내가
again, it
공급을
is a matter
주면
of the
내가
cost.
그거를
If you
할 수
supply the
있게 그다음에
power and
그것으로 인해서
electricity,
생긴 이득을 같이 공유할 수 있게 하는 게 중요하겠죠. 그래서 그 공유의
the
개념
benefit coming,
그런 이득이나 혜택의 그 이득을 서로 공유하는 관점을 좀
the benefit should be
우리가
shared,
적극 제안하고
and that is something that we
그런
should
제도를
suggest.
만드는 데 노력을
And we
해야
need to
됩니다.
make efforts so
근데
that
이런 게
the
이제
efforts can
굉장히
be shared
큰
and the
문제가
profitability and the benefits can be shared as well.
에너지가
But that
정말
is not that
효율적으로
easy.
에너지를
Let's say
공급하는 게
within the
가장
city,
중요하잖아요.
of course, the energy
서민들이 쓸
supply
에너지를
should be
본인들
coming from the
지역에서 개발해서
local
쓰면
sources
좋은데
close to the
그러기에는
destination, I
현재
mean.
임금
However,
물질도
to do that,
현재 상황이
actually it can be really costly,
좋지가 않아요.
and we have the
그러면
high
그 공급
population
문제를 해결할
density
수 있는
within the
게
cities.
기술이고
And to solve
기술도
that, we
저희가
need
부족한
better
측면이 있어요.
technology,
그래서
but we
앞으로
are
기술을
actually
조금 더
lagging behind when it
발전시키고
comes
훨씬
to
더 지능적이고
technology. So
고차원적인
we
기술을
need
쓴다면
technical advancement so that
그런다면
we can
조금 행복할
localize
수가
the
있죠.
energy
근데
sources.
모든 기술의
However,
수준은 여전히
still,
그
the
원초적이거나
technologies are
처음적인 수준인데
rudimentary or only the basic level,
신재생 에너지 목표만
especially
잡아서
for
앞서
the
나가고
renewable
있기
energy
때문에
sources.
우리
But our
앞으로도
target
한참 동안
for the
반복될
renewable
거라는
energy
것을
sources is too ambitious.
어떻게
So
용인할 수밖에
these kind
없어요.
of
이제
issues will
그런
be
일들이
repeated. That's
한꺼번에
a fact.
같이 잘 일어났으면
So
좋겠다는
I sincerely
그러니까
hope
제도도
those issues
발전하고
can be addressed with the
기술도
policy
이렇게
development and
발전하면서
technical
그러면 기후
development.
위기를 극복해 나갈 수
With
있으면
that, we
좋겠다는 게
can
사실은
overcome the climate
많은
crisis.
분들에게서는
That's something
오랫동안
that we
고민이죠.
are wishing for.
엄청나게 큰 고민 중에
That's a
하나입니다.
huge task given to
또
the
하나
scientific
이제 두
community.
번째 녹색 도시에 대한 얘기를
Second,
하실 때 그 녹색이
when
진짜
you are
녹색이
talking about the
아니다.
green
이
city,
논쟁은 저희가 뭐
Well, I think
이전
that
정부하고부터
discussion, I
계속해서
mean, since the
해왔죠.
last
근데 그렇게 되는
administration, we have been
이유가
having this discussion,
태양광이나
but
에너지 발전
that
시설에서도
has become so
마찬가지입니다.
because, I mean,
근데
the
이
same thing goes for the
분야에서 또
solar and
여러분들이
the
좀
wind
답답하고
farm, and we
느끼시는
are
거에 대해서
feeling the
생각하는 부분은
frustration. And I
생각보다 우리
think we are particularly frustrated by
도시원이나
the rivers in
누구에게
cities and the
관련된
water
전력들이
space, the law governing this whole rivers
기후 이 관점이라든가
do not
생활
take
다양성
into account the
관점을 어떻게 넣을 수
biodiversity
있는지 여지가
or
없는
climate
법이에요.
changes.
근데
There's no
이제
room for
이쪽
that in the
활동을
law.
하시는 분들은
And the
실제로
people
이런
who
기술을
are in the
접목하거나
field
실제 이제 어떤
think
특정
that, I
분야에서
mean,
좀 해오거나
integrating this whole
숙성하는
technology
분들은
like the water management or the
새로운
civil
분야를
engineering
도전하면서
technologies,
가지고 있는
the
그 철학과
people,
관점
their
그리고 이
perspectives
사람들이
and their
기술을 접목하는
thoughts
관점에
and the
대한
way that they
이해가
use the technologies,
훨씬 더 생각보다 낮으세요.
they have
근데
lower
그쪽은 이제
level
그쪽
of
분야에 대해서
awareness
굉장한 이해도가
about this whole
전혀 이해도가
green
없기
thing,
때문에
and they don't have
어떤
any
면에서 그 사람들이
understanding
생각하는
about the needs.
문제의식도
So in some
그다음에
sense,
기술에
their
접근하는 기준,
systems and their
철학 이런
standards and their
것들에
thoughts and the
아까 말씀하신
philosophies
그런
are
녹색이 진짜
like
녹색이야?
totally
그런
different.
생각을
And
본인들 하시는
they don't even think about what is a real green thing. And the fundamental issue here is that in Korean society, our people, I think 70% or 80% of the people think the other issues are even more important. In our province, Gyeonggi province, when you see rivers, or the parks, we get a lot of complaints which are about the sunrise and the sunset time. We see too many insects and they cannot stand there's so many insects and it's too dark at night, it's too dangerous, and the bushes and the trees are too high and it's not safe for the kids or the women. And that's something that we have never thought, as an issue. And that's not really relevant to the ecology or the green space. So the government officials or the engineers have to deal with this whole complaints from the public, and they need to find a way to resolve that. And the River Act or the Lake or the Water Management Act or any law on the management of the national territories, they don't think about this whole perspective. So what we have to do moving forward is to build some conditions so that we can change the mindset of the people with the legislation or with something that we can force people to see it from a different perspective. I'm not saying which is more important or which is less important, and that will not change the whole discourse. In some sense, we need the education to change their mindset and to raise their awareness. But as a researcher and as a person who works for the government, I think that education is not enough, and we have to be more proactive in exploring stronger solutions. I'm telling you this because, well, sometimes we have to make a very extreme decisions when it comes to urban or the development of cities or power generation plants. And there are, whether it's in science or technology, when there's like an upper river and a lower river, we have to protect the cities because that's where there are a lot of people. And when you have the sea or land, and people tend to protect the land, and that's the choice of evil. That's how we call it. And even there are researchers who work on this whole evil choice. Because if you think the minority should be sacrificed for the benefits of the majority, and they make the decision to do that, we may face such choice, but we have to also think about these non-human beings. And I think the choice that we have to make here is really clear. So what we need to work hard is, there's this kind of evil choice. Is it something that we have to really face, and what is the best way to deal with such choice? And can technology help us to deal with this choice? Or will there be a better way that we can utilize technology? And we have to work on keep making the changes. So thank you very much for your presentations, and I hope my comments might or might not have helped you, but that was really a good question. Thank you for sharing.
네, 원장님 말씀 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for the wonderful
기후
comments.
위기를 대응하는 과정들이
In response to climate crisis, and when we are making this society anew, it is not a soft path. It can be challenging. And we should think about it over and over, whether we are on the right path or not. The reason we are discussing here today is to check out what kind of changes we should make and whether we are on the same path or not. And I am a part of the youth group for climate action. And what can be the definition of the youth based on the age, based on the generation? Mr. Ko was there at the time. And the youth can be characterized by asking a question, and they are in search of the answers, and they have aspiration. So that's the definition of the youth. If you are facing an issue, you should not simply criticize. You should be the change yourself, and you should pursue the answers. Then you can be the young people, the youth. And we've been asking questions, what is the cause of climate change? And we should think about what is the main cause of the climate change. We are trying to find out the solution. The green and the transition to the life, is there any negative factors when we are making that transition? And I have a question to Mr. Ko. In the rural area, there is a transition to renewable energy sources, and you raised an issue that there are so many renewable facilities only within the rural areas, but it can have some degradation about the scenery and landscape. Do you think it should be banned, or if the renewable facilities are facilitated, and how it should be located, and what can be the desirable way to do it? I told you about energy justice and climate justice. Let me bring the concept. First, justice is not just about the distribution, about profit. The resource itself should be distributed. The solar panel are sometimes voluntary, and people want to get some profit, and the profit has been distributed with the participants. And even when a cooperative is made, and usually developers are simply sharing the profit. Of course, there are some good practices of the solar panel cooperatives, but what I am suggesting is, even on a small scale, the people in the town should become the developer themselves rather than just sharing the benefit. And they can be the developers themselves. They can be actively participating, and they can get the profit out of their project. I know it's really difficult to become an energy developer, but it is not right to just let someone else do it. But from the viewpoint of justice, we should make a model where the local people can actively participate and get more profit. Again, the solar energy resources should be equally distributed to the local people. And the next issue is we should also think how best we can put more solar panel or renewable facilities within the city town, and how we can put the renewable energy sources close to the place which is consuming lots of electricity. In the case of the LG, in the Changwon factory, they have put lots of solar panel in their factory. In the past, people were criticizing that, but now people are accepting that. So, when the industrial town or the industrial complex is trying to have more solar panel, it can be really helpful. So, again, it's something that we should study, how we can put more solar panel into the urban environment and industrial complex.
Thank you so much. I mean, your presentation, when you look at the details, I mean, we didn't have too much time to cover all that, but the rural areas, we are seeing the problem, so we should stop that. That's not the point, but what we are trying to say is that that's the context and that's the challenges, and we are not fully taking them into account, and the development is now done from the outside people, and that's the problem. And he explained what transition is the right one for the rural areas. We have to understand their perspectives and their context, and that they should lead this whole development project, and then we can incorporate the context of the rural towns better. And also, when you think about why the rural areas should be the site, I mean, when we have that project in the urban areas, we also have to think more about what should be the right approach and for the transition. And for the second presenter, I'd like to ask a question as well. Well, this whole ecological perspective should be better reflected into what we do as human beings. And many researchers have talked about that, not just you, but things are not really changing. And as Ms. Hong just mentioned, the legislation doesn't change, and also the enforcement or the implementation, the people who are implementing the laws and changes do not have the strong understanding about these perspectives. So to have that, the ecological researchers and the experts have to be also involved in changing the laws and regulations and make sure that they are reflected into the implementation stage as well. So in this regard, how can we better incorporate these ecological perspectives into the urban planning or the legislation or making the changes? What should we do for that purpose? Well, I think to make that happen, to reflect them into the regulations, public awareness should change. As the Vice President Song pointed out, well, advanced regulations and building a great ecological park will not be enough. Because if people complain that, I mean, there's too much bush and too many insects and they could not walk, it's not safe. If they keep raising the complaints about that, then we may not have fully ecological space and it will be managed in a non-ecological way. So the public should have better sensitivity about the ecology and we should have better awareness among the public. But as you can guess, that's really tricky part. Well, other parks in other countries, like the Green Park in UK and London, the dead trees are just there, abandoned as they are, and there are like little animals walking around the trees, and they have this like a big hole caused by these little animals in the whole greens. And if we were in Korea, we might have sent our people to kill the insects, but they have this little sign instead. This is the house of Mr. Badger. And so they are trying to educate people how this little animal is now trying to keep this or protect this green area. So it's not really about the law or making a legislation. It's about the culture, how they are enjoying this whole little footprint of this badger and how they take it as a part of the nature. So that will be also lead to the ecological sensibility of people and how we can really spread that mindset. That's also the starting point of our question. I think education is also a solution, as you may think. But in Korea, we don't have the proper environmental education. We have environmental teachers, but we only have so small number. And since 2009, they stopped hiring educational teachers. And in the middle of 2010, there was only one round. And since then, there was no further hiring of the educational like teachers for the environment. And we have like less than 100 environmental teachers in Korea. That's a problem. So that's really something that we have to change in Korea.
감사합니다. 영국의 사례가 되게 재미있는 것 같아요.
Thank you very much. The UK case is really interesting. That is the house of the someone or some creature. So that has been welcomed by many people. So that is something that we should think about together. And how we can nurture that kind of culture can be really important. We only think about the human rights, and the attorneys and the lawyers raise their voice about human rights. How about who are going to keep the rights for the migratory birds? And who are going to have the rights for the nature? And who are going to fight for that kind of non-human rights? That's something that we sometimes forget in our daily lives, because that's something that we cannot understand, because that is sometimes delivered with a language that we cannot understand. That is why the role of the ecologist can be really important.
저희가 11시 10분까지라서
We were supposed to finish by 11:10, so we have two presenters and one panelist. I would like to give the 1 minute for each for the closing comment.
얘기하셨으니까 송미영 부원장님
First,
또 마무리
Ms. Song, one closing remarks, just about a minute.
네, 오늘 이런 자리에서 이제 같은 생각을 공유하는 분들하고
It was great to have a discussion with like-minded people. It was a pleasure, just as we discussed in our own place. The issue of education, technology, institutions should be further studied in our own area, and we should come up with a new solution together. And please, let's work together. Thank you. As Ms. Song said, yes, her comments remind me something new. As a scholar for the political science, I know it is nothing bad to pursue profit. It's natural. It is not a matter of good and bad. The developers for the solar and wind energy sources have some dilemma. The developer should consider the resistance of the people into their cost. And the people remember the bad stuff from the previous developer, and the citizens will resist again, even though the good developer is coming in next. The social cost is now increasing because of that kind of negative circulation. So, the profit is really important. The profit is really high? No. And there is a RPS cap. And we are not increasing the RPS cap. So REC market is not expanding in Korea. The government is not taking care about the profit of the developers. So the developers are, in a way, losing their profit. And as Mr. Song said, when I was traveling to Gwansampo in my study area, I can see many birds. Whenever I see birds, sometimes I give the photo to him, then he can tell me more about the birds. And there is 149 megawatts of the facility. And you should have the environmental assessment. That is a mandatory requirement for the assessment. But sometimes they can split the 140 into two, 70 and 70. In that case, they can avoid that kind of a mandatory assessment. Environmental impact assessment can be detoured in that way. There are so many loopholes, so the policy needs to be enhanced so that the policy we have can be fully in place. And there are many ecological valuable places in rural areas. So from the non-human perspective, we should take care those places as well.
Thank you. And now, Mingyu. Well, I think the session was for like a youth session. So as a closing comment, I'd like to send some message for the youth in the environmental community in Korea. Well, as I work in the field for like climate crisis, I mean, there are so many activists who have a lot of passion and a lot of energy, and I really respect their passion. But there's one thing I wanted to tell them. I mean, this whole climate activist, young activists, most of them are so far away from the ecology or this whole greenery. I mean, there are so many birds and this whole dogs and the little species in the river, and they are not aware of this whole species. They do not recognize them, and they tell us that we have to overcome the climate crisis and the climate changes, but their own life are so alienated from this whole nature and the ecology. So we have to have this connect, and we have to reconnect with nature. And to overcome this whole climate crisis, we have to be the true messenger for the right message. And they should be the leader for our climate action. And their role is really important. But they are now disconnected from the nature. And that's why we had this whole climate crisis in the first place. And they should not lose this whole connect from this nature. Otherwise, they will not have really, truly meaningful and powerful activism or action. That's just a message for them. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it was great for the message, and we have to create some program where we can work together, and you will also join that program, right? For the youth. I mean, I'm not telling you you have to do it, but we have to work together to go to the sea and to go to the field and the rivers and the rural areas, not just working as an observer. We have to be in the scene. We have to be more active to better understand the context of these whole issues, to make the real changes. And that really naturally leads to the following session. In the session 2, we will hear from the youth and how they are working as an activist and how we can collaborate with the activists in the other countries. So we will have a 10-minute break, and we will come back for this session 2. So that is it for the session 1. Thank you so much.